very good evening to you once again in business news at this hour. The Department of Trade, Industry and Competition has vowed to accelerate the implementation of industrial policy. Newly appointed Minister Parks Dau recently took office following the swearing-in of the 7th Administration Cabinet. Dau has said that he doesn't intend on reinventing the wheel, but will instead focus and expand on existing policy as well as economic transformation. The Minister joins us now in studio. Good evening to you. A busy couple of days. First in office. How's it been?
Good evening and thank you very much. It's been quite a hectic period. We've spent the past few days literally being orientated in the work of the department, immersing ourselves with the detail of what happens in the different divisions of the department. That excludes at this stage detailed engagements with the 18 agencies that we have in the department, including the development finance institutions, that is the ITC, NEF and others. So it's been quite intense. And of course, we've had to create time to communicate with South Africans on the work that we do and the direction that we'd like to take as a government.
And part of that communication, Minister, is going to involve appointing CEOs in the entities that you've mentioned, the IDC for one. How is that meant to be navigated?
It's very important. We have decided that having looked at the levels of vacancies that we have in both the department and the agencies, that we should prioritize capacitating these institutions, appointing leadership. We will be doing a comprehensive review of where all the appointments are and what needs to be done, so that we're able to then take that process forward. But it is a priority because with stable institutions and solid leadership, you're able to easily or more easily implement your programs.
Absolutely, and one such vacancy that also has to be filled within your own office is that of a Director General. How far are you there?
Well, of course, it's part of the appointments that we're currently reviewing, so we would be able to comprehensively look at this, including a few Deputy Directors General in the department that need to be appointed and be able to take the process forward. My sense is that that's where we should start. You should start by having a Director General and holding hands with the Director General and the Deputy Ministers and saying, how do we work together on the rest of the institution and the entire group?
And you have two deputy ministers. A difference of ideologies may occur, one of your deputies being from the Democratic Alliance. How do you see this playing out?
Well, our starting point is that we work on the basis of the statement of intent that has been signed by all parties. In the statement of intent, there are clear underlying principles that guide the government of national unity. In relation to our mandate, this includes a focus on equity, a focus on redress, a focus on social justice in terms of economic development. It is a principle that we've all agreed to as parties in the government of national unity. We've also agreed on a minimum program, and that minimum program talks about transformation. It talks about the ability to protect and secure jobs and workers' rights. It talks about industrialization and job creation. So for us, we've got a framework that would guide the work that we should do. All we simply need to do is, having gotten the skeletons, is to put the meat around the skeleton and say, we've got a minimum program. How do we work on it in detail? I should say that from the onset, we've developed a fairly good working relationship with both deputy ministers. We've collectively agreed that we have a duty to the country, we have a responsibility to the economy and to the people of this country, that we work together. And from the initial sessions that we've had, I'm quite encouraged by the rapport that's building in the department.
It's about getting the work done at the end of the day for South Africa, and part of that development is also within the industrial action plans. What should take priority? Because some of these plans, as well as the master plans around the work within the DTIC, are not necessarily new.
Well, what we have said is that industrialization and reindustrialization is one of the programs that we should drive and focus on. And this would include accelerating the implementation of the master plans and ensuring that we're able to mobilize partners in the implementation of these master plans. In reality, our job is about the private sector. It's about industry. It's about ensuring that industry is able to thrive and we're able to grow the economy and create jobs. And we need to be able to work directly with industry in the execution of our responsibilities and the deployment of the tools at our disposal to ensure that we're able to facilitate growth and development. So that's the one area of focus. The second area of focus is in relation to transformation, ensuring that we create greater equity, equitable access to economic activity and participation is important. The acceleration of the Black Industrialist Program, broad-based Black economic empowerment implementation, and other tools that we need to be able to mobilize to achieve levels of equity and transformation. And it's transformation in relation to that, but it's also transformation in relation to emerging opportunities and industries. We're talking about the green economy and the role that it could play in driving and accelerating growth and development in our country. We're talking about the role of, for example, new technologies. And this would include electric vehicles. We haven't had a discussion in the country about autonomous vehicles and the role that they would play in the future. But talking about electric vehicles, it's a policy position that has been adopted. The white paper has already been published. And there are areas that have been identified for implementation. But this is a sunrise opportunity. It's a new opportunity where we can be able to streamline the role of government and the private sector, developing the appropriate skills to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. And this is at the back of a region. This is South Africa and surrounding countries having the wealth of mineral resources that could play an important role and will play an important role in these new energy vehicles and green economy opportunities. So we think that being able to work with our peers and counterparts in the region is going to be important as we collectively leverage off and benefit more from our mineral resources that we have in the continent.
New opportunities are all great in terms of what I'm hearing for the South African economy and the economy of the future. But the plans that are in existence have not been implemented effectively, even with years of them being in existence. What is going to be different now, and what maybe have you identified and notified as areas that would need to be tweaked to ensure the acceleration that you're speaking of?
You know, we spent the whole of today looking at industrial policy and industrial tools, or industrial policy tools at our disposal and implementation mechanisms at our disposal. And we went into a deep dive because we thought this is a particularly important area. I can say that from the discussions that had all agencies across the board, from the DFIs to the trade divisions that are talking about international trade, from export point of view, from a sector development point of view, and said, what are the tools at our disposal to implement? And our focus is on ensuring that, yes, we'd require policy tweaks here and there, but the basis of industrial policy is solid in the country. So what we need to do is to identify, now that we have the master plans, now that we have a partnership with the private sector, how do we ensure implementation and align all government efforts to be able to accelerate that implementation? I spoke about skills as a particular area. So there are industries in which we don't have the appropriate skills to be able to support the industries for growth and development. And we now need to partner with the Department of Higher Education and Training and say, well, we need to produce these skills at this level to be able to support our economy. And those are things that we need to talk in detail about implementation. What are the mechanisms of implementation, but also what are the best possible instruments of implementation? There are instances where you're better able to implement through a partnership with the private sector. There are instances where you're better able to implement leveraging of procurement capabilities of, for example, our SOEs. So we'll need to bring all these role players around the table and say, let us work together in these areas. And in our discussions today, many of these areas emerged. Many opportunities were identified. We now need to take that to the next step and say, what are the next steps, and bring our stakeholders on board so that we all work in tandem towards common objectives.
That's encouraging to hear. You earlier mentioned the export market, and that's where the solar panel tariff issue then comes up. There's an immediate need, but at the same time, a deliberate agenda by the state to ensure that localization takes place here, but it's not going to happen overnight. Talk to me about the intricacies around that.
So we need to look at all instruments at our disposal, tariffs being part of the instruments, of course, trade negotiations being part of the instruments, but also sector development programs being part of the instruments that we're able to deploy. And instead of deploying them in silos, we need to ensure that there's synchronization of all these efforts across the sectors and departments, not just ourselves, but also with those that would be the drivers of implementation. The Department of Electricity and Energy would be the driver of implementation on the key issues around energy and in relation to not just transitioning to alternative energy, it's also about massive investments in the transmission infrastructure, massive investments that are required by municipalities in relation to the distribution networks in our country. We spend a lot of money and resources and capability to address the generation capability, and that's beginning to yield the results. But almost immediately, in fact, in the past few days, Eskom has said to us, our transmission lines are facing problems. We need to address that. Fortunately, the minister had identified that as a priority area in terms of addressing the overall electricity issues. But when you think about these issues and say, yes, we're resolving a challenge, we're required to invest massively in addressing these issues by national government, by the transmission agency, by municipalities. As we invest, how do we leverage off tariffs, of sector development, of skills, of incentives that we have at our disposal, and the ability to essentially sustain certain industries such as steels and steel and other related industries in the sector.
Minister, DTIC in the past has been critical in advertising for South Africa to foreign investors. What's your plan there?
It certainly is part of the work. We would be working very closely with Brand South Africa and the DTIC, but also with DERCO in relation to promoting Brand South Africa and attracting investors, attracting partnerships with foreign-based institutions and companies.
What are we selling on that front?
We're selling a capability of an economy in Africa that's the leading economy. That's the starting point. We've got the instruments of driving an economic development program at the back of a fairly well-established private sector. Sorry, we're also selling ourselves as a platform into the African continent because we're an integral part of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and our ability to work together with our colleagues on the continent to jointly leverage of the benefits of our respective economies. So we now have the ability to sell ourselves as an endpoint, but also as a partner to African countries and say, we as Africa are coming to you as a common market, if you like, that creates these opportunities, but we're also coming to you as trading partners that are able to work with you in these sectors. And those are issues that we'd be able to sell. But we're also selling a very well-established financial services sector that's able to support such instruments. And I think a government that is stable. I think in many instances you would acknowledge that, with the sort of electoral outcomes that we had in the recent elections, many countries would have struggled to come out of it with the level of stability that we've come out of it with. So we're a relatively new democracy, but we've been able to transcend our first major challenge with regards to electoral outcomes. So we can sell a story that says we are collectively committed as South African political parties, as South Africans, to a stable democracy that's growing and creating prosperity.
Lastly, I understand that you met with the former DTIC Minister Patel. Talk to us about how or what you took away from that particular gathering by way of a handover of sorts.
We met with the minister this morning. In the meeting was Minister Patel. He was coming to give us a detailed briefing. But we also had Deputy Minister Whitfield and Deputy Minister Kodlimpi. And I think all three of us have accepted that, in fact, the wealth of knowledge that he brought, but also the level of detail with which he interfaced with the work of the department was very encouraging. But also the extent of the responsibility that we have. Because we're talking about trade, we're talking about going to engage in negotiations around AGOA. We're talking about going to engage with BRICS countries and the nuances, because it's one thing to give us a handover report, it's another to say, there are these nuances that you need to be cognizant of. So that, I think, was very helpful. But it's also about giving us a sense of, in relation to the master plans, because we've been spending a lot of time reading. But in relation to the master plans, remember when you engage with this sector, these were some of the detailed discussions and compromises that had to be made, and these are the things you need to be vigilant of. So it was that level of handover. I should say we didn't even finish that meeting, so we agreed to convene later in the week to be able to take forward that work. And I think we'll certainly take full advantage of him, of his deputy ministers, in ensuring that they also hold our hands. Because in reality, we're an entirely new ministry, and we need to be able to work with those that our predecessors.
All the best, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks, much appreciated.
That was DTIC Minister Patel talking to us about his plans in this portfolio.